Last month, Governor Kathy Hochul signed into law a social media bill. It's the first of its kind, and it requires social media companies to limit what they show kids. We wanted to know what North Country people think of this, so we asked our texting club. The results on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Clarkson University, offering over 95 programs of study with campuses in the Hudson Valley, Central, and Northern New York. More at clarkson.edu.
Hey, it's David Summerstein. It's Friday, July 12th. A quick first up. Heavy rains this week filled the rivers and streams around the high peaks, and state officials are urging people to avoid hiking on Adirondack trails that require water crossings. Water levels are high, and currents are running faster than normal, making them especially dangerous to cross. The DEC is also asking hikers to avoid climbing up into the higher elevations. This week's rainfall soaked many of the trails in the high peaks, so they're more vulnerable to erosion. Now I'm just going to hand off this episode on New York's new social media law over to Amy Feiereisel and Monica Sandreski.
First off, let's talk about this bill and exactly what it's limiting.
So under the new legislation, children wouldn't see suggested posts on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. Suggested posts come from algorithms, which are trying to feed you content that you'll be interested in.
So kids would just see posts from people they've chosen to follow, right?
Exactly, like friends and family and other users that child has sought out themselves. And the idea here is that many social media platforms are designed to be addictive and that kids shouldn't be exposed to that when they're less than 18 years old.
And this mirrors big shifts on the national level, too. I mean, there was a big announcement from the U.S. Surgeon General recently about social media.
Yes, Dr. Vivek Murthy announced in June that he'll be pushing for a warning label for social media platforms that would advise parents that platforms could damage kids' mental health. That would be like the warning labels on tobacco and alcohol. Murthy has been moving in this direction for a few years now, based on new research and studies about social media. Last year, he recommended parents set phone use limits, and he's called on tech companies to change or restrict features like autoplay and the infinite scroll.
Well, and he's actually said that features like those, quote, prey on developing brains and contribute to excessive use. I mean, that's pretty strong language. Well, so does this signify somewhat of a shifting tide on how society thinks about the internet and social media and how it should be regulated for young people, do you think?
It certainly seems that way. You know, there's a current proposal in California to restrict phone use at school. This is a hot topic on the national stage, like lots of different legislation. Of course, one of the biggest challenges, especially with the New York law, will be implementation. Critics, which are mostly tech companies, say, it's essentially limiting free speech. They also argue that the science on harmful impacts of social media isn't settled.
And then there's the time it'll take to just make these changes on the platforms, right?
Exactly. So in New York, for the limiting of suggested posts for kids, we're looking at least 6 months, probably longer. The state attorney general has to craft the actual rules, and then the social media companies will have 180 days to implement them. There will certainly be lawsuits, so no changes in the immediate future.
Now, let's get to what North Country folks are thinking about social media and teenagers. Through our texting club, you heard from North Country parents and families and educators, too.
Yeah, it's a topic a lot of folks are passionate about. What everyone seems to agree on is that social media is definitely a challenge for the modern-day child. Carl Kirka texted us, "They are wasting their lives online, getting depressed and not interacting with real life." Nelson Spratt said, "I see social media as a detriment to young people's lives and their attention spans." Now, where folks diverge is how to tackle social media usage and if it's something that even can be controlled. Danielle Brown from Watertown says she sees a lot of educational and inspirational value on the internet and thinks adults need to lead the way with how to use social media as a tool. That's something she spent several years trying to help her nieces do.
They're family members, and I homeschooled them during the pandemic. So we were on social media all the time, find a recipe or a new painting that we wanted to try or learning how to sew. There were all these different wonderful things that all exists on there, just like there's a bunch of terrible and toxic stuff that exists on there, and it's my opinion, you should teach people, how to use it.
She feels like her nieces now know how to say no and, to seek out positive, realistic content. Her take, which is one we heard from a lot of people, is that, social media is here and it's up to parents to teach their kids how to deal with it.
And Joan Grabe texted in. She said, quote, "I heard this decades ago about rock and roll. That horse was out of the barn and this one is too. We just have to try and raise resilient kids who have balanced lives and can self-regulate their use of social media." And then there's the big question of whether these social media restrictions will even work. Teens are pretty tech savvy.
Yeah, so here's Connor Eldridge, a high school English teacher at Madrid-Waddington Central School in St. Lawrence County. He's been teaching for 11 years. He says from his experience, social media is both kids' primary way that they socialize and their primary source of entertainment. So he thinks keeping them off it will be difficult.
So I haven't met many teenagers who aren't really creative in finding different ways to go around those things. Even today, teenagers will talk about how they have kind of their own little burner phone that their parents may not be aware of, or they'll access social media on their friends' phones. So they're already finding ways to get around those parental limitations.
But what Eldridge and a lot of other folks I spoke with also said is that many kids, especially teens, are fully aware that this is a problem and that the apps are built to be addictive. So can we really expect kids to self-regulate?
Most teenagers, especially older teenagers, will tell you that the algorithm is very addictive, and a lot of them do feel like their screen time is really bad and they would love to get out of it and cut back on their screen time, but they find it really hard.
Yeah. And what about how it impacts the school environment and his role as a teacher?
As an educator, he says pretty much any teacher would tell you, it's a distraction in the classroom. It can lead to bullying. He also thinks it's led to less in-person engagement in things like sports and extracurricular activities, especially since 2020 and the coronavirus pandemic.
And we started talking about the state restricting social media with a new law, but some schools are already experimenting with this. Like some school districts are introducing phone bans during the school day.
Yeah, there's been legislation introduced in a number of states that allow districts to ban phones. The Los Angeles Unified School District banned phones earlier this year, and New York City Public Schools, the largest school district in the country, says it'll have a phone ban in place sometime this next school year. That was announced, just a couple weeks ago. So it's an idea that's really gaining steam and momentum.
And as I understand it, there's a school in the North Country that's experimented with that idea too.
Yes, so Saranac Lake Central School District tried something different this past school year. Their combined middle and high school is located in a spot with basically no cell service, and they changed the Wi-Fi password and haven't been giving it to students. So the kids still have their phones, but they're not allowed to have them out, and they're a lot less tempted because they have no connection to the internet throughout the school day. Kelsey Francis is a high school English teacher for Saranac Lake. She's been there for over 20 years. She says this was the first year in many that she didn't have to play phone police and that she had an amazing year.
I have just seen a huge benefit in the engagement in my class, kids talking in the hallway, people are looking up instead of looking down. And it made just group work. I just made everything going on in my class that much more enjoyable. Because there is a fear, a lot of students worry about being, taking risks as far as volunteering for something or performing in an English class. People worry about being recorded or having a photo posted. And so all of that was gone, which was just wonderful.
And did she say, how did the kids feel about it?
So Francis says there was a lot of griping for the first 2 weeks of the year and a sentiment that the school was just being way too strict. But then mostly students took it in stride and it kind of became the new normal.
That's our community engagement reporter, Amy Feiereisel, speaking with our Northern Light host, Monica Sandreski. More social media stories at ncpr.org. Music by I Am Snow Angel of Lake Placid and Evan Veenstra of Gananoque, Ontario. Have a great weekend. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.